Hey guys, I'm Sahil and I'm a co-founder of Paradigm alongside my friend and colleague Rahul. Together we created Paradigm to prepare you for change. At Paradigm, we aim to educate you on topics that are essential yet neglected in school and university. These are topics that are essential when you make a transition to the real world. This podcast is available on Spotify and YouTube, and make sure to check out our Instagram page at Paradigm Edu for more updates. Today, I'm alongside Hassaan, who's a specialist in the topic we'll discuss today and is a senior partner at Paradigm. Hassaan, if you don't
Hey
mind.
guys, yeah, sure. So I'm Hassaan. I'm a good friend of Sahil. We both studying at DIA in going to our senior year, and yeah, we're looking forward to a good podcast today.
Yeah, so today we'll discuss avoiding burnout, maintaining stamina, and working for long periods of time, effective note taking, short-term and long-term motivation, what drives people to work for extended periods of time, maintain keeping a track of your schedule, creating calendars, time management, and finally prioritizing. Today with our guest Humza. So Humza, if you don't mind, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Humza. I used to go to school at DIA in Dubai, obviously. I go to McGill University now in Canada, Montreal. I'm currently pre-med, so yeah, it's pretty tough curriculum choice. But I mean, after IB, I guess it's, they tell you it's not that bad, but it's always bad. Yeah.
So productivity is a major topic that is like discussed all over the world on YouTube and different platforms, and it's something that people strive to maintain and increase, but it's still hard. Like it's still a problem that people face. And why do you think that it's such a big issue today?
The thing with productivity is like now that we have so many distractions, like social media, it's so easy to get distracted. Like companies like Instagram or like YouTube, Facebook, they literally get paid to distract you. And when it's that easy, you just pick up your phone and you can just like scroll for hours and hours, and you think you're scrolling for minutes. You wasted half your day. Now, that's specifically why I think productivity is so hard to maintain, because people are, first of all, it's like they're not motivated enough. Like the barrier for motivation is so high that people just get distracted and start using social media. Like it's easier, right? Like picking up your phone is easier than, opening your books and starting to study, like the willpower. But like picking up your phone, clicking on Instagram, and then scrolling for hours and hours is so much easier. And then you realize you just wasted half the day. And then you're in this vicious cycle where you're like, okay, I'll start tomorrow. And then you just continue that day. And then you say you're gonna start, and then you don't. And then you keep going and going until like your day before, where fear kicks in and you're like, shit, I have an exam tomorrow. And then you have to study for that, and you end up failing the test. That is what I've seen most common in these days, especially in uni. Like people think uni people are productive. They like to think they are, because schools are different, right? Not every school is like IB. You have to actually study, right? There's no such thing as naturally smart in IB. Like you have to practice the questions. You have to like learn the material, whereas some schools, like if you do advanced placement or something in American curriculums, you have to like study, right? You don't have to study. Like some people are naturally smart and they get by, and then they get into the universities. But then when they get to uni, it's a completely different story. So yeah, that's my take on productivity and why it's so hard why it's a big issue today.
So so before we talk about overcoming that obstacle and getting out of that vicious cycle, Hamza, I've known you for quite a while. What are some specific issues you've faced with productivity over these years, whether it's distractions or maybe outside of school? What are the things which keep you distracted and unproductive?
Specifically for me, okay, when I was a DIA, right? For me, the hardest part of productivity was because I used to train a lot, right, for track, and it wasn't necessarily social media because I had no time. But for track, is like I'd go to school and then you're tired, right? And then people usually take a nap or they rest or whatever. But maybe half an hour after, I had to get ready and go to track. It was like 20 minutes away, training the track for like 3 or 4 hours at a time. And when I get home, I'm like beyond exhausted, but then I have to force myself to study. But obviously, when you're so tired, the study efficiency is not, you're not as productive. And that was a big challenge for me. Like I had to figure out a way how I had to how I could get my studying in for the day. Because if I didn't, I'd be slacking on both, right? Like if I'm at track, I'm gonna be thinking about school and like, oh my God, I have so much to study. But then when I'm studying and then I'm like, oh, I'm so tired, after track. It was a very, for me, that was the hardest thing about like school in general. That was my productivity vice, I guess.
So like when people work and they work on tasks for a long period of time, there comes a point when you start to burn out. Like it gets to a point where you just do so much work and you're not really taking that time out. But how would you say you manage burnout?
Okay, so burnout as in burnout in a day or burnout over like over a semester? How would you
I would say over a semester.
Okay, so for the way our schedule is in uni, I'm pretty sure it's still the same at high school. But like for example, you have your exams, like your final exams or midterm exams, then you have a break, right? You have like 2 or 3 weeks, I think, for Christmas for that first one, and then you have a spring break later, and then you have summer, right? For me, I don't do like before school starts. I put myself in a mindset where, okay, these few months I'm gonna have to study. I'm gonna have to like really work hard, and then the end of the 3 weeks I'm not going to do anything. So like I really put myself in like kind of a long-term interval. I don't know if you guys understand fitness like terminology, I guess, I don't know, but like interval training, kind of like where you're on for a certain amount of time and then you're off for a certain amount of time. That's how I basically manage my burnout, where at the end of the, like you see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? You have your 3 weeks and then I just don't do anything. I just relax. And then the same thing for the next semester, and then summer, and then you're free, right? That's how I saw it, and that's how I dealt with burnout. But I feel like some people are going to be like, they waste a lot of time, and then they end up not studying during the year properly, and then they get burned out towards the end, right? Because they have so much to study. But I guess the best way for that also is to find a way to study even just a bit every day. Like I know it's easy to say, but once you get into routine, it's you'll get used to it. Like they say, it's like it takes a week to make a habit, but it takes like around 4 weeks to break that habit. So that's how I deal with burnout.
Just on the topic of burnout and different studying systems, like you talked about interval training. I did get the fitness reference.
Yeah.
But
cool.
What I wanted to ask was, do you prefer like more on like a short-term basis? Do you prefer working at in long periods of time in one stretch, or taking breaks during the day and splitting it up that way?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I actually prefer long periods of time. Like I can study for around 3 to 4 hours at a time without taking breaks. Now it may seem crazy, but I usually do 2 of those blocks a day, so around 6 to 8 hours of studying a day. But what I do is I take like small, like not even breaks. I just like if I want to get a snack or like something to drink, that would be my break during that time. And the reason why I do this is because I'm sure you've heard of the Pomodoro method. It's like 25 minutes studying and then 5 minutes break, and then you do that 4 times and that's a cycle, and then you get a longer break, right? I don't like that because for me it's like when I do 25 minutes, fine, it's studying, but then I start getting into a flow, and then I can just keep studying. But then when the alarm goes off, take a break, it breaks my flow. And then again, I have to restart and I have to like build up to the peak of studying, right? Like the first few minutes or whatever. It takes a few minutes to get into that high caliber mode, right? But when you break the flow, you have to restart it. But once you start at the beginning, you don't have to keep doing that. So then I do that for 4 hours, and then I take a longer break, maybe like 1 to 2 hours, where either I eat lunch or I go to the gym. So and then I repeat that for another cycle, and then I'll be done by around 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I have the rest of the day myself. So it's just that's how I like to study. I mean, I'm sure people like the Pomodoro method better, but I guess it's based on personal preference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I've also encountered. I tried the Pomodoro method as well, and it just didn't work for me. But I wanted to know, you mentioned that you get into a state of flow where you start, working, and you get to that peak. How do you actually get into that flow?
Okay, so people think it's like some kind of Jedi trick, like it's gonna take it's impossible to master, but it's not really. So the way I like to see it is that it's kind of like a logarithmic graph, right? So you start, for the moment you start studying, the peak starts going up, right? And then you have to like really force yourself to, like, you got to connect with the material. Like, it sounds really weird to say, but you have to like it's kind of like when you're reading a book and you feel like you're immersed with the story, and you just have to keep reading, right? Like you want to keep reading, and then you forget how long it's been. So that's essentially what you want to try to mimic, and then you'll feel it. It's kind of like I don't even know how to explain it. It's basically, you just start studying, and then you have to stay focused. If you're not focused, then you're distracted, or like it's not going to work. Like for me, what I like to do is, like, my phone, I'll turn on airplane mode, and I'll put it like on some other end of the room, so that I won't have to get up and then, open my phone. And that, I'm trying to make it harder for me to distract myself. And that alone is going to prevent me from like trying to get distracted, and I'll keep focused on my work. And like once you're in flow, you can maintain that for hours at a time, and you won't even realize how much time has gone by. Like, you'll actually find studying to be fun. It's crazy to say, but it's true, because you don't realize how much time you've actually been studying, and it's rewarding, right? You do 4 hours and you're like, wow, that's how much I studied. So that's why I prefer it, and that's how I do it.
Yeah, I totally do think that building the flow and getting into that momentum, it's all about like mentally training yourself just to stay focused, get those 4 hours done, and then it does feel good after. I think that was a good introduction about avoiding burnout and maintaining stamina. The next topic we have is related to note-taking.
Yeah.
So just to get started on that, since we have a mix of both probably university viewers as well as high school students, I'm not sure about this myself, but what would you say from your experience in both fields is the difference between note-taking in high school and note-taking in college?
Okay, so that's a good question. The way I like to see it is that high school is kind of like a habit builder, preparing you for uni. So high school is a little bit more lenient in the way you study. Like, you can experiment and you'll still be relatively fine. But in university or college, you really need to like have really good set in place study habits, because you're going to get abused. Because the way you might study in high school, if you don't have a proper set way to do it, you're not going to do well, even if you did well in high school. That's why people get really unmotivated and discouraged when they go to uni, like, at least from what I've seen, is because they don't have really good study habits set in place. Now, it's not very different in the sense of how to take notes or whatever, but the difference is that in high school, you'll have a lot of study methods, but in uni, you really want to stick to one kind of framework.
Right. I mean, you're kind of scaring me now, but
yeah.
Anyways, I guess that's something I'll have to face next year.
Yeah, it's really, it's like life.
Yeah. I'll get into it, and we'll all get into it, and
yeah,
eventually we'll find our way out. So, now going into the specifics of note taking, when I've done my research, trying to experiment different methods of note taking, I've come across things like just the simple and the most basic outline method, where you create you put a topic, then subheadings, and then just bullet points just to add detail onto it. And then the things like the Cornell method or the boxing method. So specific to that, have you tried different note-taking methods? If so, what have you used?
Okay, so I'm going to say some pretty controversial things here that many people might not like to hear, but I actually stopped taking notes. What I do instead is I focus on this thing called active recall. Basically, it's constantly testing myself, and that's how I remember things. Like, it's obviously, when you're in uni or whatever program you're in, there's a lot of things to remember, there's a lot of things to understand, and you don't have that much time to do it. So I skip the whole note-taking process entirely, and I go straight to making questions. So like, I'll make flashcards or whatever works for you, even just like writing a bunch of questions on the paper. So like, your notes, whatever the teacher gives you or whatever you have, I convert everything into a question form. Like, For example, a really basic example, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And then from that, I'd make a question, what is the mitochondria, or what is the powerhouse of the cell? Or, like, that's how I do it. And then once you get the question, because our brains, the way we're wired, is we like to get asked questions. That's how we remember things. Because, like, I don't know how, it's easier if someone asks you a question and then you answer, and then there's like a connection, right? You build more synapses to that, and you build your, I don't know how to explain this in layman terms, but the strength between the connections of the information you have in your brain, they get stronger. So it's like you keep, like, it's kind of like building a muscle. You keep hitting it and it gets bigger and bigger. And that's how we like to be tested. Active studying is 100 times more efficient than passive studying. And passive studying is basically, taking notes, making them pretty, and rereading them, like highlighting, completely useless, in my opinion. But some people might like it and swear by it. I personally don't. I just make a bunch of questions, and that's how I study. I did try all of those methods, the Cornell method, outline method. I mean, it's great. I mean, it also depends on the setting, right? Like if you're in class or after you're making review notes, like it all depends on what you're doing. So like, how do you want me to split it up? Do you want me to tell you from lecture or from review notes?
To be honest, it's fine. Like if you don't, use those methods, the common methods, there's no point, going into it. It's fine. Like the thing about active recall is I actually heard about it. I watched this YouTuber, Ali Abdal, and he's a med student.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a med student, and he swears by this active recall, and that's something I was gonna try. So it's quite, it's quite interesting. It's a different way of going about it, and I guess it is effective. And going off your experience, like that is something I would also recommend to to the listeners. That's something you should try. And generally, just
but the thing is,
sure.
Just one second. Sorry, I forgot to tell you. Basically, when I'm in a lecture, this is probably maybe a little bit easier for you guys to understand, like in terms of the outline or whatever. We have a lecture, right? We get a lecture posted the day before. What I do is I look at the lecture the day before or before class. I'll put it into a Word document. Like I'll get rid of the slides. I'll make it into kind of like a packet. So I have it like I put the title and then I'll put all the notes under it. I don't actually study. I just make it easier for me to like read through. Then when I go into class, I'll have like a pen or whatever, like a 4-color pen, the way I like to use it. And I'll go through the whole thing and I'll look at things that I have to memorize, because there's difference between things you have to memorize and things you have to understand. Memorizing things is kind of a blessing because it's easier to study because you just have to memorize it, right? You don't have to actually understand. You don't have to put that much effort in. You just have to keep testing yourself. So like I'll outline those things with like a different color pen, saying, okay, this I need to memorize. And then when I'm in class, I'll change the color and then I'll add on notes, like annotate the lectures, based on my packet, what she says if I find something important, or like I'll star something if it's emphasized, so it helps me make questions and it helps me understand what I have to focus on. And then when I come to actually studying, I don't actually take notes, but there's this method, it's called the Feynman technique. Basically what you do is when you want to study, right, you want to know if you understand something, you get a piece of paper, you write the concept on the top, and then you try to write that concept and try to explain it to someone. Because if you can explain it to someone, that's how you know you really know it. If you can't explain it to someone, then you know that there's gaps in your knowledge, and you have to go back and you have to strengthen those or fill those gaps. Because that's the best way to know if you understand something. And people don't like this method because they think it's a lot of effort. But I promise you do it once, you're never gonna have to study it again. Because you know what you're missing, you know what you have to work on. And then you don't have to go through that insane amount of studying all over again, right? You just test yourself. Testing yourself is significantly easier and requires less motivation, I guess, to do, because it's super easy. It's like you go through a question, you answer the question, you get it wrong, you do it again, And then I like to do it as spaced repetition. It's like spaced repetition. I'm sure you guys are familiar with. It's basically there's a curve, there's a forgetting curve, and you want to prevent the forgetting happening, or forgetting to happen, something like that. But it's like you first study the first day, then the third day, then the 5th day, then things like the 10th day. I think there's different variations in spaced repetition. but that one works for me particularly good because then I don't forget it. And then you don't have to study like crazy every day, right? There's some things you always studied, and you know what you have to study and what you don't have to study.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing I was also gonna discuss is it's also good to experiment and try different techniques, because one thing might work for you, but it may not work for someone else. So it's really important to try different methods using the active recall. Looking at like taking notes from the textbook and then using those notes as like a guide and then making your active recall questions. And there's just so many ways. The Feynman technique, that's something that's also really useful. But like, with the influence of technology, and nowadays people like using digital notes instead of like physical notes. So is that something you'd recommend, using digital notes rather than physical?
Okay, so I mean, this question has been asked for years, right? Like even before our time, like 20, even 30 years ago, what's better, typing or writing your notes? I personally find okay, cool. I find typing notes is much better than sorry, not typing. Writing notes is much better than typing, because typing, what the problem is for example, you're in class and you're typing notes, right? You're not going to really pay attention to what the teacher's saying. You're going to miss cues. Like if she says, or she's trying to emphasize something, you're going to miss it entirely because you're focusing on literally transcribing everything she's saying because you think you're going to miss something. I think it's a lot easier and you save yourself a lot more time in studying if you actually write them. Because when you're writing, you're forced to condense your sentences so that you can keep up with the teacher. And then you focus on writing things that are actually important, and not like I don't know, something that she says but you don't really need to know, something that's not important, or something she's just referring to but it's not a big deal. I feel like when you get to start typing, you're not going to be able to distinguish between that, and you're going to end up studying more than you have to. And also there's studies that once you write it, there's a significantly more, like a higher chance you're going to remember it later than if you type it. Because typing, you're just, you're transcribing and you're not really paying attention to what you're writing. Like, I don't know if you guys tried this, but you go to class and you start writing your notes, and then as soon as you walk out of class, you're just like, what was the class even about? But when you're writing your notes, like you have a connection with the teacher almost, and you're more engaged. And it's easier for you to ask questions than after if you don't understand something. That's the problem with typing, is when you type, you're not sure what you know, or you don't know what you don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like it's very, again, take it with a grain of salt. Some people like typing, it works for them, but based on studies and scientific literature and all that stuff, writing has been proven again and again to be the best way to study, or the best way to take notes.
Yeah, you're getting pretty TOK and philosophy.
Yeah, the funny thing is I hated that class.
I can imagine, but what would you say about different subjects, right? Like, let's say you have a math class compared to something which is more writing intensive, like econ. How would you adapt your note-taking systems or methods based on what it is you're actually taking notes for?
100%. So I have a math class, right? Cal 3, and basically instead of focusing on making questions, I'd actually do, I mean, technically it's the same thing, but things like math and chemistry, they focus a lot on application stuff, right? They don't really test the concept. They teach you this kind of like, they give you the tools to tackle a problem, and the problem is what's tested, not the actual how to use the tools. And that's the thing with like subjects like math and chemistry, and maybe even computer science. It's more problem based, and that's what you have to do. You have to do problems, right? You gotta do practice questions, and it's not about the notes, it's about strategies to solving the question. Like for example, like an integration question, they're not necessarily gonna ask you how to they're not gonna test the skill of integration. They're gonna give you a problem, and then you're gonna have to figure out if you have to use integration or not, and then it's a lot more complicated. Or like stoichiometry is a perfect example in chemistry. Absolutely hated it, but it's like you have to, like, they give you the content, super easy, right? And then when you get the question, you're like, when did we learn this? It's because people aren't doing practice questions, and that's how you learn for these subjects specifically. It's not all about, okay, a mole is 6.3 times 10 to the power of 20, negative 23, like stuff like that. That's not how it works. And yeah, for classes like biology, or I don't even know what else you had an idea, can't remember, but memorization intensive stuff. Something you have to memorize or understand concepts, and more about testing what you know or don't know, right? So like, what's the mitochondria, or what's cilia, or what's hippocampus, stuff like that. But even psychology or essay-based stuff, it's also different because you need to. It's more about a skill to writing, right? Like, for example, essays, you get graded. I remember in psychology, I was graded more on how I wrote my essay than the content, because like, you need to know, where you're gonna put your studies, or where you're gonna put your evidence and stuff like that. That's what we were mostly graded on. Critical thinking, that's a big one in essay-based subjects. And so yeah, there is a difference between note-taking. I'm lucky enough to only have one, or maybe one or two, because I have math classes, right? But that's where it gets really tricky in IB, because you have like all three kinds of subjects. You have application, memorization, and then you have like essay stuff. So that's why it's a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I definitely agree. There's you definitely have to adapt your note-taking or the way you study for different subjects.
Yeah, speaking about that, also, like, when you do something like maths, or at least personally, I condense my notes, because it's just, okay, there's a rule, this is a rule, and then you just apply it in questions, right? And then something more intensive like biology, where you start memorizing, that's when you take like, lots of notes, and it gets a little heavy. But that's just the nature of the subject, right? And that's what you have to do. So I mean,
and that's
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I was just gonna say, that's just how it is, like for math, like you said, math, your notes they're super short, right? And that should give you an indication of, okay, I'm just gonna be more practice based than actually learning stuff. Like, that's another way you can kind of tell what kind of study method you have to use. If the content is super short and they focus more on practice questions, you're gonna have questions like that, not like necessarily what is this rule, or what's the chain rule, or what's the, they're not gonna ask you that stuff. So that's a good indication of how you're supposed to know what kind of, like, what method you should use. It's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't like subjects like biology, and I prefer maths and CS, because it's more the practice, less notes, less memorization.
I mean, again, but that's some people are better at memorizing, some people are better at actually practicing. It all depends on the type of person you are. Yeah,
exactly.
That's the problem.
Yeah, so you have to figure out what you really like, I guess.
What works for you? What are you good at?
Yeah, I think this is a really good discussion about note taking, and just kind of debunking the myth of actually taking notes in specific cases, adapting it to different subjects. Moving on, we wanted to know about prioritization and prioritizing certain tasks. Have you seen benefits of prioritizing tasks in the long run?
I mean, I don't see why people don't prioritize. I mean, it's like, why would you not? It's like, think of it like a medical emergency. Would you save a person that has a broken thumb, or someone that's heart is literally splitting in half? I mean, that's layman terms, but like an aortic dissection. Who would you save first? Someone that's about to die in literally 30 seconds, or someone that can live without a foot? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very triage stuff. You have to figure out what's gonna kill you in the shortest amount of time, and then you have to fix that. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, again, it's very medical, but it's a good analogy in my opinion. Like, you, for example, you have a test tomorrow, and you're working on an assignment that's due in a week. That's like, that's the stupidest logic I've ever, like, I don't understand how people do that. So yeah, prioritization is a big thing. You save a lot of time. You have less stress in your life. I mean, it's like a win-win for everyone. I don't understand why people don't prioritize. It's very important, especially when you're in uni, when you have like 10,000 things you have to do.
Yeah, it's genuinely crazy to think that some of the easiest things that can help us, we still avoid doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't make much sense. But that's why Paradigm, and that's why we have you specifically to help us fix
Yeah,
that. But um,
sure.
on that note, what would you say are the important criteria to consider? Obviously, apart from the obvious ones like timing, what other maybe enjoyment or ease of tasks, what would you say is important to consider when prioritizing all the stuff you have to do?
Okay, so I see what you mean. You want to like prioritize in terms of managing your life and stuff like that.
Yeah, as in like what
Okay.
do you, which factors come into account when prioritizing?
Okay, I see what you mean. So, I mean, obviously it depends. I mean, there are certain times where if I have a family emergency, for example, and I have a test in 2 days, I'm going to prioritize my family emergency because that's something that's important to me. Or like if I have a track event in an hour and I have a test the next day and I'm studying, I'd probably stop studying and start getting ready for my event. You know, like you really have to see what's important to you. Like obviously for me, if I had to number them, it's probably family, school, track, and then maybe my social life, and then maybe my sleep. So that's how I kind of prioritize my life. I don't sleep a lot, but yeah, you also have to have time in the day where you focus on your mental health, right? You can't study 12 hours a day and expect to stay sane the entire week. It's impossible. Like that's why time management and prioritizing tasks is super important. Like you got to see. Honestly, it's a lot of trial and error in the first few weeks, especially if a few weeks of uni. Like you got to see what works for you. But those are some things that come in mind. Like that's the way I think when I'm prioritizing stuff. Or like if I have a driving test or whatever in a week, I know that's not as important as my final exam. That's maybe a little bit later than that. I'll focus on studying for my exam, even if it's further away, instead of my driving test. Because I know my driving test is not going to be the end of the world, but my final transcript, I'm going to send that in, you know, that's going to get me a job. I'm going to prioritize that. So it's very dynamic, I guess. It all depends what's important to you and what's not. I mean, obviously, if school is not as important to you, then by all means, prioritize going out with friends and stuff. It all depends on what you want and what your goals are.
So you're saying that priorities aren't inter-school or within one specific aspect of your life, but apply to different things and can be stretched across everything you're
100%.
doing.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Just adding on to that, I heard you mention you don't sleep much.
Yeah.
This isn't explicitly linked to priorities, but would you say that it is important to prioritize sleep to some extent, even if you think you can thrive on 3 or 4 hours? How do you think sleep comes into account in the whole priority picture?
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, sleep is super important. I'm sure everyone knows this, but they don't really care. But think about it like this. You're breaking something down, right? And it needs to come back the next day. Like you keep hitting it, and then you gotta, it's gotta repair itself for the next day. The only way that repair happens is when you sleep. Like there's a study, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it. I don't remember the name anymore, so it doesn't even matter. But there's a study where they had I think it was like 6,000 or 7,000 participants. It was a big study, so the evidence is pretty credible. They said that after studying 6 hours a day, and they gave them 7 hours of sleep for half the participants, and the other half of participants, they had I think it was like 2 or 3 hours of sleep for the week. And at the end, after they studied, they did a test for all of them, and they found that people that slept more were able to attain 50 to 60% more information from that week compared to the people that only got 3 to 4 hours of sleep. So it's crazy. It's a significant difference because our short-term memory is stored in the hippocampus, right? I think, pretty sure. I can't remember psychology. Anyways, we have a place where short-term memory is stored and a place where long-term memory is stored. The process from short-term to long-term exchange only happens when we sleep. And the efficiency of which that happens also depends on the quality of your sleep. So I'm sure maybe you're familiar with REM sleep and the different stages of sleep. We go into REM and then we come out and then we go back in. It's like an interval. kind of stuff. And the REM sleep is actually where we start repairing ourselves and remembering things. So it doesn't matter if you sleep for 12 hours, if your quality of sleep is not good, where you keep waking up, I mean, it's useless. So yeah, it also depends on what works for you. There's people that in the world that are crazy anomalies. I think there was this guy who mastered 1 hour of sleep and he's working perfectly fine. So it all depends. I mean, but general rule of thumb, sleep is super important. I know I don't get enough sleep. I am working on my sleep schedule, but yeah, it's it's just life, I guess.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we're all guilty of not prioritizing it. I'm sure Hassan and I, in the IB as well, it is we don't give that prioritization, and that is also due to time management. That's something we get onto. But before that, with so much going on in your life, like how do you prioritize your tasks? And like in terms of techniques, what do you use? Because like
Okay.
there's things like doing like the easy tasks first. Let's say there's everything's due the same day. Do the easy task first because there's a low barrier to entry, gain that momentum, or would you like, okay, I'm gonna fight through this, get the most intensive task done because I know that if I don't, maybe I'll run out of time, things like that. What do you use?
No, 100%, I agree. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the stuff, but for example, I'll give you an example. You have a bunch of things you have to study, right? Certain subjects, not necessarily you don't have a test the next day, you don't have an assignment the next day, but you have chapters of things you have to do. I agree with you. Doing the easier tasks first is much better in this case because it builds momentum, it builds flow. Like the simple act of crossing something off your to-do list is enough motivation to keep going. Like your brain likes that it's achieving something, and then you want to keep doing it. You want to keep that feeling up, So definitely the easiest stuff. Like sometimes when I'm feeling really unmotivated, I'll even write on my list, take a shower, eat breakfast, and then I'll cross those off, and then I'll get to my, study chapter 1 or study chapter 6 or do 100 physics problems. Like that's how I get through it. But in the case, for example, of a test or an assignment the next day, I'd probably do a few easy things first, just to get the ball rolling, and then I'll finish my essay, and then I'll do the more easier things after I finish that intense thing. So I kind of like a sandwich. I interweave it in this circumstance. But then again, if I have a test the next day, I'm probably not going to study anything else but for that test. So it also depends on your situation. And this to-do list or whatever, I started waking up pretty early now. I think 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I make a to-do list. I go on with my day. I do my run in the morning, and then I get down to it. Yeah.
We talked quite a bit about priorities now. The next thing we want to talk about is motivation. It's a pretty universal issue, right? Like students, parents, everyone faces issues with motivation. And just to start off, let's just get straight into it pretty much. How do you motivate yourself when you're in a slump, when everything piles up, it's exam season, you have track on the side, it feels like a mess and you kind of want to break down, but how do you keep yourself motivated in those situations?
Okay, so again, I'm going to give you some pretty controversial advice. I'm a very militant person, so I maybe, in some cases I'm not the best person to ask because I'm very extreme in this sense. It all depends on your goals, right? For example, for me, I have a pretty difficult goal to achieve that I want to achieve. Like I want to be a surgeon one day, hopefully. And what I do is I have this. I used to have this whiteboard. I just moved recently, so I don't have it. I can't show you, but I have this whiteboard, and every time I felt like unmotivated or like you said in the slump, I'd like write down what my goal is or like what I want in the future, and the only way I'm gonna get that is if I get through this day, and then I write it, and then that's how I get motivated, and then I keep going whatever I have to do. But then again, the next day I feel in a slump again. I erase what I wrote on the whiteboard and write it again. So it's kind of like a cycle, right? But it takes a few days, and then after a while you get used to it, and then you just keep going. Like you really have to want. You gotta want it. and you gotta put in the work. And I mean, you gotta realize that there's no other way you're gonna get your goal. And if your goal is really important to you, you're gonna find a way no matter what. Like that's just how we're wired. It's the problem I find is when people they set really big goals and they're not really passionate about it. Kind of like parents pressure them into it. You know, I know some people. I know a lot of pre-meds that I'm with right now, like at school. They're not as motivated to become a doctor. It's been pressured from their parents, or you know, and they don't necessarily want to study because they're not passionate about it, and that's the problem. Like especially when choosing a field, make sure you know what you want to do. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard for you to study. Like that's the hardest thing I feel like. Or you gotta figure out if you really want it, or if you want to change your goal, or you want to do something else in your life. What makes you happy, you know? Like you got to figure out what's distracting you, what's keeping me from studying today. Like what do I want to do instead? You know, there's that honestly today that's a big problem. Is pressure from the parents, and then you end up getting stuck into something you don't want to do, and then you get these perpetual cycles of slumps that you don't feel motivated.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You have to do, like, in a very short phrase, do what you love, and then I guess that's when you feel motivated to pursue that goal and work day in day out and achieve something. So specific to motivation, I realized that there's different ways of motivating yourself and different types of motivation, like self-motivation, internal motivation versus external motivation. So by external, I mean something like, those YouTube videos that they have that short-term effect of motivating you for, I don't know, like a few hours or a day, but like, what do you use and what are your thoughts on internal versus external?
Okay, so I don't do the whole YouTube video thing. I don't feel that motivates me. I feel like it just wastes time, honestly. External, internal motivation really comes from within, like if you said, passionate about what you do. And for me, the external motivation is literally writing on that whiteboard and seeing what I want to do. Like, this is what I want to be. Or like, sometimes I write on the board like Dr. Salam. Like that's what I'm looking forward to, right? Or like, I have a lab coat. It's basically like our white coats kind of thing. And like I picture myself like, this is what I'm gonna do, and the only way I'm gonna do it is if I study. Like there's no way I'm gonna get there without studying. I gotta get through the day. You know what I mean? Like that's how. I guess it's both internal. I guess I'm not sure. External. Yeah, I don't really do anything externally. I guess that's my only thing. That's what motivates me. That's what works for me. Also, maybe like track. Maybe if after a track session or a workout, like I feel super motivated. It's crazy because it's like a productivity jumpstart for me. Like that's why I do a 1 mile run every morning, just to get my blood pumping, and I feel super productive after.
To be honest, relying externally too much on external factors can even be counterproductive, because that dependency to always watch a YouTube video or something.
Yeah, it's just a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. Compared to like, it works for some people, but again, compared to like from yourself being internally motivated, I feel like that does trump and overarch it. So 100%. An issue from this is, to be honest, I'm pretty guilty of this myself, and I'm not sure if you were during school, but now, one issue I face, and a lot of students my age face, is the dependency on deadlines to get stuff done. So your teacher assigns a task, it's due next Wednesday. The fact that it's due next Wednesday is the only reason you start doing it Tuesday night. How do you really, like, it's terrible to just have a deadline and work only because of the deadline. I'm guilty of this myself. How do you stay away from that? Not just look at the deadline and say, oh, I need to get this done. And sometimes it might not be something you love, right? It might be an English thing.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. I know what that feels like.
How do you work on that?
So again, I'm gonna be pretty blunt and very extreme. I basically set my own deadline, 3 or 4 days before it's due. Like I completely ignore what she says or the teacher says when it's due. Like an assignment is due 3 weeks from now. I say my assignment is due 2 weeks from now, and then I put that in. I forget about the actual deadline, and then I'll have it done. And then I'm working to the deadline, but I'm working to my own deadline. So even if I'm, you know, even if I work towards my deadline, I still get it done. And then I have a week to go over it or whatever. Because I feel like when you depend on the timeline or like the deadline the teacher gives you, you finish it the night before and then you have no time to go over it or get advice or get help. Like if you do it early, the teachers are going to be so much more, they're so much more likely to help you or give you advice on your work, even if it's pure garbage. Like it's better to have it done than have a blank page. Do you know what I mean? Or that's how I deal with it.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, like you said, you have that militant attitude, being strict with yourself as well, setting those deadlines. And yeah, like obviously it's unideal if you just leave it to the last day, right? That's not something.
But I mean, I get why people do it. It's because they feel like, oh yeah, I have so much time, and then all these days go by and you find out, oh damn, it's due tomorrow, and then you got to do it. But I guess if I set my deadline earlier, for me, it's like I have more time to do things that I love, like track, work out, go out, spend time with friends. It's like I have more time. You got to think about it. Like if you have your deadlines to what earlier, like to your own schedule, you'll have so much more time to do what you want. And that's how people got to see it. Or I guess it works for me, but everyone should definitely try it.
Yeah. And another thing is that as school students, we kind of rely on deadlines, but later on, when you pursue something on your own, let's say starting your own firm, for example, a company, there's no one like overlooking it. There's no one that's gonna do something to you or penalize you for not getting the work done. So it is important to establish that attitude early on, and that's something great. So moving on. It was a great discussion on motivation. Moving on to something that's quite, closely interlinked with that would be something like time management and, how do you actually maintain that. So you just briefly mentioned about the things you do. You do track, you're a pre-med student. So how do you manage your time with the hectic schedule? How do you effectively do that?
So I'm going to show you my schedule and then I'll explain from there. So I'll share my screen real quick.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Now, hold on. Just move this out of the way. Okay, so you guys can see it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is basically my schedule. I mean, this is before I got my track training or my my work schedule. Like, because I work as well, right? I work on the side. Because I like to. It's crazy. I do too many things, and then I also have my research stuff that I do with professors. I still haven't gotten those schedules, so already, if you see it, there's like no time, right? There's like a few blank spaces here and there, and then I also volunteer at hospital at the ER department. I still haven't put that in. So this is essentially how I do it. I basically block out times in my calendar, or this is my weekly schedule, and I just make a week schedule, and this is what I do every week. It's easier that way because then you get into a routine, and then you're not like, oh damn, I have to start a new schedule, or oh I have to do this. It's just this is going to be your life for the next few months until you get a break. And you probably can see I have this half of the day, and I think Saturday, yeah, I have off for now. I'm probably going to have a little bit of work here in this area. I might have some research here, around here, But usually I like to set at least half a day or a day just for myself. Do whatever I want, keep it blank. And I feel like you need at least one of those days in your week where you do nothing. Because if you don't, then again, it comes down to burnout. I guess helps answer your question. You need to do stuff that you love. And you need to find, there's more to life than studying and work. You know what I mean? And you need that day to realize that there's more to life. And that's how I guess I prevent burnout as well. I have that day to myself. And as you can see, I'm done pretty early with my studying. Obviously my classes and lectures are a little bit late, but usually I'm done by the end of the day, and I have dinner and then I sleep. I have quite a lot of time towards the end of the day. I'm not struggling, I'm not thinking about it. And then when I wake up earlier, I have that time to think about what I have to do the next day. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to stress. And that way my quality of sleep goes up, and I'm stressing during this when I'm sleeping. Oh, I have to do this in the morning. Oh, and then this prevents me from pulling all-nighters, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do for yourself. especially the night before test. So that's basically how I do it. And obviously you can see I have workouts in my schedule. It's kind of like a break for me. Super important. You really need it in your life because the whole freshman 15 in uni is absolutely 100% real, if not even worse. I've seen people go from fit to fat in the first 3 weeks of uni. So it's definitely important to keep workout in your schedule, and it keeps you healthy, it keeps you more productive. It like gives your brain a break. Like there's something about when you're just lifting weights after studying or before studying that it feels like you're free, and then you go back and then you're ready again to study if you have that. I mean, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends on, like, for example, this day I study first, my lecture, then I have a break and workout. But like you can see, like my schedule it seems hectic, but there is a break in the day. There's time off for me. It's not like I'm studying all day. And I feel like that's what people think they're going to have to do when they get to uni or in high school and IB, especially. That I have to study every day, the whole day. Like that's not necessarily true. If you study effectively, if you study consistently, you don't have to do that. I feel like because people procrastinate and they wait till the last minute, they end up saying, "Oh, I have to study every day now. I have to study 10 hours a day." Like, it's not about how much you study; it's about the quality of your studying. And that's how I see it, and this is how I manage my time. Obviously, you're not going to stick to your schedule 100%. I'd be lying if I told you the schedule, like I've done everything to the hour, to the T. Like, obviously, I've had to like shuffle things around sometimes when I have, like, obviously when I told you my prioritization, family emergency, you gotta go. Track emergency, you gotta go. It's in that way, you can't see your schedule as set in stone. If you do that, you're gonna make yourself crazy. You have to realize that you're not gonna stick to the schedule, but it's more of a kind of like a roadmap. Sometimes you go a little bit, like when you're driving on a road on the highway, you might go over the line a bit here and there, but you're generally still going in the same direction, right? And that's how I like to see it.
So going on with that, you kind of showed like something similar to like a calendar, like a weekly calendar, an overview
Kind of thing,
of what you're. Yeah. So based on that, do you think calendars are effective for everybody? Like, there might be some people who maybe set some tasks that are not possible or not realistic, or on the other hand there might be people who procrastinate. And just going off on that, I think something that you touched up on is people procrastinating because and then leaving everything to the end. It's about studying smart and not studying hard. Like, it's again about the quality. So going off that, like, what are your experiences with calendars? And sorry for the long question, but
No, don't worry about it.
what would you suggest for people who don't use calendars, who maybe struggle with them because of certain procrastination?
Like managing your time? Honestly, the best way, if you really hate calendars, is like every day wake up in the morning and write a to-do list. Like, I still do it, but I do that every day as well. But I feel like if you write a to-do list for everything you have to do in the day, you're gonna get it done, because like, it's kind of like a person standing there saying, "These are the things you have to do," and you're gonna keep looking at it, right? And you're gonna be like, "Oh, I have to do it," and you're gonna end up doing it. I mean, from my experience at least. If you don't use calendars, you gotta have somewhere to write down like deadlines and something, or I mean, I feel like it's impossible to stick to a schedule or stick to a routine if you don't have some kind of calendar type thing in place. But I guess the only way I can think of it is if you have a to-do list every day. And if you're more disciplined, I mean, it's kind of, if you think about it, it's harder to write a to-do list or kind of like write a daily schedule every day of what you're going to do, because you waste time, right? If you have it set once for your week, I mean, you just stick to that. Personally, I feel like it's more work not to make a schedule beforehand and you just stick to it than coming up every day and writing things down, because then it's going to be harder for you to prioritize things. It's going to be harder for you to stick to a schedule and stay productive.
Yeah, it's good to have like a clear kind of perspective and view of like, okay, like an overview of what you're going to do. Obviously things change and you'll have to work around stuff if an emergency comes through, but that's something that you will go through and experience, something that you'll learn from. But going off calendars again, Do you think they work for everybody? And like, do you have any specific experiences with calendars that have helped you out in a specific way, or like a specific instance?
Like I said, this thing helps me a lot. The thing I showed you, that my weekly schedule, it's super good. It's only good if you realize that you're not gonna stick to it 100%. There's things gonna come up and completely mess your schedule up, and you got to be okay with that. It's just part of life. There's no way you're ever gonna stick to that schedule 100%. You got to realize it's kind of like a trajectory. It's a way, it's a direction I'm going in. You know, it's not like I'm exactly gonna take the same routes or whatever. It's you gotta. That's all you gotta realize. And these things have worked for me like since I started uni. I mean, high school is a little bit easier to manage because you already have like a timetable, I guess. It's a little bit more lenient in that sense where you can kind of like make up your schedule. You don't have to study as much. I mean, you're it's not the end of the world if you don't get amazing grades in high school. I mean, sure, it's good to get good grades, but you'll end up getting into uni somewhere, right? The problem is once you get into uni and then the job, because your job is not going to ask you where you went to high school, what you did in high school. They only care about what you do in uni, and that's the problem. Not necessarily a problem for some people. I guess it's a good thing because they might have completely bombed high school and did really good in uni, and that's great for them. So you got to really see high school, in my opinion, as like a way to learn. It's a place where you're learning. It's like a sandbox where you're practicing different things, and you got to figure out what works for you.
Humza, I thought school was hard, but now you're just scaring me more and more.
Yeah, dude, it does. The whole lie about IB makes your life so much easier is the biggest lie I've ever heard in my life. It's so not true.
Well, it's good. It's good you're giving us a heads up on that. Yeah.
Wake up call.
Exactly. And everyone listening, he said it himself. He's been through it. It's been a good hour so far. Just we talked about this in the beginning as well, slightly, but with the ever-growing influence of social media, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is, apart from your calendar, even within one block specifically, what would you do to avoid distractions? I remember you mentioned airplane mode, phone completely switched off. But distractions come from everywhere, YouTube on your laptop.
Especially,
Exactly.
I'll actually tell you something about that. There's this app, I don't use it anymore because I guess I've disciplined myself. It's called Self-Control, I think. And you basically can block things off your laptop or your websites and stuff, and then you set a certain amount of time. And there's no way in hell you're going to be able to open that stuff again. Like, it's kind of like, even if you shut off your computer, shut it off, delete the app, like that block is not going anywhere. It does. I'm not sure how the technology works exactly. It's like a thing on your computer. It's very strange, but it works. But I know I've definitely had instances where you're watching a YouTube video on some kind of the anatomy of the heart or whatever, and then you see something about Obama water skiing, and you click on that, and then you realize Obama has a super tall daughter, and then you search that up, and then you go down this rabbit hole, and you've wasted so much time. But I know what it feels like. So I think self-control works pretty well for people that are like, it's really hard for them to stay focused. I'm sure there's other apps similar to that, but that works pretty good. I've used it in high school, I think, once or twice, when I was really like, I'm not doing anything,
Yeah, I think a pretty common theme we've seen in this hour is that it's good to rely on these apps and stuff, but in the long run, you need to.
You gotta figure your shit out.
Exactly, you gotta work from yourself. That's okay. Humza, thank you so much. We're genuinely so grateful, Sahil and I, and everyone listening as well. We've heard quite a lot of controversial things, to say the least, but that's what makes it fun, right? And that's what got you where you are. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to stay tuned for more interviews at Paradigm, and thank you.